Welcome back to Infidelity Tales Lab. We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Frank Hardy adjusted his steel gray tie as he surveyed the graduation party setup. 25 years of building his architectural firm had taught him the importance of attention to detail, and today, everything had to be perfect for Adrian. White linen tablecloths rippled in the gentle breeze, weighted down by crystal vases filled with fresh peonies and garden roses. The flowers had been Marla's suggestion, but the layout was pure Frank. Each table positioned to create optimal flow while maintaining clear sight lines to the makeshift stage where Adrian would give her speech later. "The caterers are here," called Jerome, his assistant of 15 years, hurrying across the lawn with his tablet. "Should we start setting up the appetizers?" Frank checked his watch, a graduation gift from his own father. "Give it another 30 minutes. He paused, scanning the yard. "Did Philip confirm?" "Your cousin called this morning," Jerome replied, a slight hesitation in his voice that Frank noted but didn't acknowledge. "Said he wouldn't miss it for the world. Bringing some special champagne from France." A familiar warmth spread through Frank's chest at the mention of Philip. They'd grown up more like brothers than cousins, sharing every milestone. While Frank had built his success methodically through his architectural firm, Philip had seemed to glide effortlessly through life, turning everything he touched into gold through his investment banking career. Marla emerged from the house in a pale blue dress that complemented her eyes. Even after 25 years of marriage, the sight of her still made his heart skip a beat. She'd barely aged, her blonde hair expertly highlighted, her figure maintained through religious dedication to Pilates and tennis. "The ice sculptor's running late," she announced, joining him on the porch. "But they promised the graduation cap design will be perfect." She rested her hand on his arm, a gesture so familiar it was almost unconscious. "You've outdone yourself, Frank. Adrian will be overwhelmed." "Nothing but the best for our girl," Frank replied, watching as the catering staff began setting up. "Where is she?" "Upstairs with Hannah and Jessica, getting ready." Marla's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. "Claire's bringing her camera too. She wants to document everything." "I thought we hired a photographer?" "We did, but you know Claire. She's been capturing these girls' lives since kindergarten. Let her have this too." Marla squeezed his arm before turning to head inside. "Don't forget to change into your new suit, the navy one." Frank watched her go, admiring the graceful way she navigated the porch steps. They'd built this life together, piece by piece, from their first tiny apartment to this sprawling colonial. Every success, every milestone, had been shared with their extended family, especially Philip. The sound of teenage laughter drifted down from upstairs. Where had the time gone? It seemed like yesterday he was teaching Adrian to ride a bike, and now here she was graduating as valedictorian, headed to Yale in the fall. "Dad!" Adrian appeared on the porch, her graduation gown draped carefully over one arm. "Everything looks amazing." Frank raised his camera. He'd been determined to document every moment of this day. But as he lifted the lens, something peculiar happened. Adrian shifted, ever so slightly, putting herself between his camera and the far corner of the yard near the old oak tree. He adjusted his position, and she moved again, the movement so subtle it seemed almost unconscious. "Let me get a shot of you with your gown," he said, taking a step to the left. Again, she moved, maintaining that careful blocking position. "Dad, can we do photos later? Hannah and Jessica want to help me with my makeup first." Adrian's smile was bright, too bright. He realized later, too practiced. "Sure, sweetheart, but don't take too long. Your mom wants some family photos before everyone gets here." "Of course." She was already turning away, her friends clustering around her. "Oh, and Dad? Is Uncle Philip coming?" "Wouldn't miss it," Frank replied, watching as relief flickered across his daughter's face. "He's bringing champagne from France." "That's so like him," Hannah giggled. "Your uncle is literally the coolest, Adri. Remember that time he took us all to New York for that Broadway show?" Frank remembered. Philip had arranged everything. Premium tickets to Hamilton, dinner at an exclusive restaurant, a suite at the Plaza. He'd done it to celebrate Adrienne's early acceptance to Yale, though Frank had insisted on paying him back. Philip had just laughed it off, saying it was his privilege as an uncle to spoil his favorite niece. As the girls disappeared inside, Frank found himself studying the old oak tree. Something about Adrienne's behavior nagged at him, a splinter of doubt in his otherwise perfect day. He raised his camera again, zooming in on that distant corner, but there was nothing there except shadows and gently swaying leaves. Jerome appeared with a question about the seating arrangements, and Frank pushed the thought aside. He had a party to run, a daughter to celebrate, and a family to coordinate. Whatever game Adrienne was playing, if she was playing one at all, could wait. But even as he turned to follow Jerome inside, Frank couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, like finding a hairline crack in the foundation of a building he'd thought was structurally sound. The party was in full swing by late afternoon, the yard filled with conversation and laughter. Frank had just finished discussing a potential project with a client when he noticed Adrienne by the dessert table, surrounded by her friends. She was radiant in her white graduation gown, the honor cords draped elegantly around her neck. This time he thought he'd finally get that perfect photo. The light was ideal, the angle just right. He raised his camera, but once again, Adrienne shifted position. The movement was subtle, anyone else might have missed it. But Frank had spent his career paying attention to spatial relationships. "Frank!" Philip's voice boomed across the lawn. "Where should I put this champagne? Needs to chill before we open it." Frank turned to see his cousin weaving through the crowd, a wooden case tucked under his arm. Philip looked exactly as he always did. Perfectly tailored suit, salt and pepper hairstyle just so, that easy smile that had helped him close countless deals. "Jerome can take it to the wine fridge," Frank replied, waving his assistant over. "Save it for the toast later." "Always the organized one," Philip laughed. "Remember that tree house you designed when we were 12? Every board and nail planned out beforehand. And you were the one who convinced Uncle James to buy us the power tools." Frank remembered, though something about Philip's laugh seemed forced. "You always knew how to talk people into things." Marla appeared, slipping her arm through Philip's with the easy familiarity of family. "There you are. I was just telling Claire about that amazing restaurant you discovered in Paris." Frank watched as his wife and cousin moved through the crowd together, the way they seemed to anticipate each other's movements, finishing each other's sentences. It was nothing new. They'd all been close for so long. It was natural they developed that kind of rapport. And yet, he raised his camera again, this time not aiming at Adrienne. Through the zoom lens, he caught the way Marla's hand lingered on Philip's arm, the subtle lean of their bodies toward each other, the quick glances they shared when they thought no one was watching. "Mr. Hardy?" Jerome appeared at his elbow. "The caterers want to know about the main course." "Not yet," Frank replied, his voice steady despite the growing unease in his stomach. "Let's wait until everyone's finished with the appetizers." He paused, then added, "Jerome, how long have you noticed?" His assistant's hesitation was answer enough. "Sir, don't play dumb, Jerome. You've been with me for 15 years. You notice everything." Jerome shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Hardy, Frank, it's not my place." "How long?" "The Christmas party," Jerome finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago. I saw them in your study when I was collecting coats. They didn't see me." Frank nodded slowly. "Did you help Marla with the seating arrangements?" "Yes, sir. They requested to be seated together, didn't they?" "Not at the family table." "Table 7, Jerome confirmed. "Behind the oak tree, the old oak tree." Suddenly, Adrienne's strange behavior made perfect sense. She'd been running interference all day, trying to keep him from noticing what was happening in that shadowy corner of his own backyard. Frank smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Jerome, I need you to do something for me. Call Luther Haney. Tell him it's time." "Luther? Your investigator friend?" Jerome's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, how long have you known? Suspected?" "Long enough." Frank's smile didn't waver. "Long enough to have Luther do what he does best. Long enough to have everything in place for today." He raised his camera one last time, but now he wasn't trying to capture happy memories. Through the lens, he followed Marla and Philip as they made their way toward the oak tree, watched as they slipped into the shadows beneath its spreading branches. He kept watching as Philip's hand found Marla's waist, as she turned into his embrace with the familiarity of countless stolen moments. The champagne glass shattered in Frank's hand. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but it carried across the yard like a gunshot. Heads turned, conversations paused, and beneath the old oak tree, Marla and Philip sprang apart, but not quickly enough. Frank had captured it all, every damning frame preserved in digital clarity. "Frank!" Marla's voice carried a note he'd never heard before. Not fear or shame, but something else. Relief? Defiance? "Frank, we need to talk." "Do we?" His voice was surprisingly calm as he brushed glass shards from his hand. A thin line of blood welled up across his palm, but he barely noticed. "After 25 years, now you want to talk?" Guests were starting to notice that something was wrong. The music played on, but conversations died away as people turned to watch the drama unfolding before them. Adrian appeared as if from nowhere, positioning herself between Frank and the oak tree one last time. "Father," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "Please don't make a scene." "Not today." "A scene?" Frank laughed, and the sound made several people step back. "Is that what you're worried about, Adrian? The scene? Not the fact that you've been helping them hide this? How long have you known?" "You were never here." Marla's voice rang out, sharp and defensive. "Always at the office, always with your buildings, your projects, your perfect plans. 25 years of family vacations, and you never once noticed how close we'd become. Even the kids call him Daddy when you're not around." The words hung in the air like poison, seeping into every carefully constructed moment of their shared history. Frank stood perfectly still, his bleeding hand forgotten, as the implications of Marla's statement rippled through the gathered crowd. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "I have something I need to retrieve." In his study, Frank opened the wall safe behind his architectural awards. The manila envelope inside felt heavy with more than just paper. He'd had it for 3 months, ever since Luther delivered his initial findings, but he'd waited, watching, gathering more evidence, trying to convince himself he was wrong. When he returned to the yard, the tableau remained unchanged. Marla and Philip by the oak tree, Adrian standing protectively before them, guests frozen in uncomfortable witness to the unfolding drama. "Meant to be together?" Frank's voice carried clearly across the hushed gathering. "That's interesting considering Philip's DNA test results." The color drained from both their faces. Philip's hand dropped from Marla's shoulder as if burned. "What are you talking about?" Frank opened the envelope with deliberate slowness. "You see, cousin, something's been bothering me for years. Little things. The way you always seem to know our family's medical history a little too well. Your mysterious blood type that never quite matched up with Aunt Sarah's stories about your birth." He withdrew a sheet of paper. "Hospital records from 1965 are fascinating reading, especially the part about a baby boy born to a teenage mother, adopted by my aunt and uncle in a private arrangement." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You're not my cousin, Philip. You never were." Marla's face had gone from pale to ashen. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Frank replied, his voice cutting like steel, "that the man you've been sleeping with for God knows how many years isn't even a blood relative. At least that's something, isn't it? Though I wonder what Aunt Sarah would say if she knew how you've repaid her kindness in raising you." Adrian stumbled back a step, her perfect poise finally cracking. But you're my uncle." "No, sweetheart," Frank said, and for the first time, a hint of pain crept into his voice. "He's not your uncle. He's not family at all. He's just a man who's been lying to all of us for a very long time." The silence in the yard was absolute now, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the gentle rustling of leaves in the old oak tree. The tree that had sheltered so many of their secrets. "How long have you known?" Philip's voice had lost all its charm, revealing something harder underneath. "Long enough." Frank set the envelope on a nearby table, letting its presence speak for itself. "Long enough to understand that everything about our perfect family was built on lies." The gathered guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between social propriety and morbid fascination. Claire's camera hung forgotten at her side, but Frank noticed several phones discreetly recording the scene. Tomorrow, their perfect family's implosion would be the talk of every coffee shop and tennis club in their prestigious suburb. You can't just throw accusations around, Philip started, but Frank cut him off with a wave of his still bleeding hand. No more lies, Philip. No more pretending. He turned to Adrian, whose graduation cap was now slightly askew, the honor cords tangled. You chose sides? Fine. But you chose a side built on deception. Remember that when you're giving your valedictorian speech about integrity and future success. In the wake of Frank's DNA revelation, the backyard had become a tableau of frozen shock. Guests stood in clusters, their phones forgotten in their hands, as the implications of what they'd just witnessed sank in. Frank placed a second envelope on the table beside the DNA results. The manila paper was crisp, official-looking, bearing the letterhead of his family lawyer. The divorce papers are just the beginning, he said, his voice carrying across the now silent yard. Luther didn't just find out about Philip's true identity. He found something far more interesting in those financial records you thought were so well hidden. Philip's face, already pale from the adoption revelation, took on an ashen quality. Frank, whatever you think you found. Oh, I don't think. I know. Frank's smile was terrible in its calmness. You see, Philip, or whatever your real name is, I started looking into those investment opportunities you've been pushing on our friends and family. Fascinating reading. Tell me, does anyone here actually know where their money is? A murmur rippled through the gathered guests. Richard Thompson, Frank's oldest client, stepped forward. What are you talking about, Frank? Philip's been managing my retirement portfolio for years. Has he? Frank withdrew several sheets of paper from the second envelope. When was the last time you actually saw a real statement? Not the ones Philip generates on his own letterhead, but actual documents from legitimate financial institutions. The murmur grew louder. Philip raised his hands in a placating gesture. Everyone needs to calm down. I can explain everything. The market's been volatile, but all your investments are secure. Like the college fund you set up for Adrian? Frank's voice cut through Philip's reassurances like a blade. The one you've been managing since she was 5? Show her the balance, Philip. Show her what's left after you siphoned it away for your high-yield investments. Adrienne's perfect composure cracked. What? No, that's not. Uncle Philip would never. Don't call him that, Frank snapped. He's not your uncle. He's a con man who's been stealing from this family for decades. Every vacation he treated us to, every lavish gift, every generous gesture, all paid for with stolen money. Our money. Your college fund. Claire Bennett, who had lowered her camera during the initial confrontation, raised it again. The professional photographer in her couldn't resist documenting the moment Philip's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The Broadway shows, Henna whispered, realization dawning in her eyes. The shopping sprees in New York. The summer in Europe. All funded by fraud, Frank confirmed. Luther's very thorough. He tracked every penny, every account, every victim. He turned to address the gathered guests. How many of you invested with Philip on my recommendation? Because I trusted him? Because he was family? Hands began to rise, tentatively at first, then with growing urgency as the implications sank in. Dr. Reynolds, the Andersons, the Whitman family, pillars of their community, all drawn in by Philip's charm and Frank's implicit endorsement. No. Marla's voice cracked as she stepped toward Philip. Tell them they're wrong. Tell them Frank's lying. Tell them about the investments, the properties in France, She stopped, horror dawning on her face. The house in Provence. The one you promised we'd retire to. Was that even real? Philip's silence was answer enough. You son of a bitch. Richard Thompson's face had gone red with rage. My grandchildren's trust funds. Everything we've saved. I can fix this, Philip said quickly, backing away from the advancing crowd. The market's about to turn. I have deals in place. Give me 6 months. Like you gave my daughter time to find another way to pay for Yale? Frank's voice remained deadly calm. The acceptance letter came 3 months ago. That's when I first noticed something was wrong. You got nervous, didn't you? Started making excuses about market volatility, about needing to move funds around. That's when I called Luther. Luther Haney. Philip spat the name like a curse. always poking around in other people's business. What did he promise you? A share of whatever he thinks he's found? He promised me the truth, and he delivered far more than I expected. Frank turned to Adrian, whose graduation gown now seemed like a cruel joke. You said you chose sides. Well, sweetheart, let me show you exactly what side you chose. From the third envelope. How many had he prepared? Frank produced a stack of documents. Bank statements, transfer records, forged signatures. The evidence of decades of systematic fraud laid bare on the same table that had earlier held graduation cake and champagne. Every vacation, Frank continued, his voice carrying the weight of accumulated betrayal. Every holiday gift, every time he played the generous uncle, the beloved cousin, he was spending stolen money. Your money. Your friend's money. Money from every person in this community who trusted him because they trusted me. The oak tree that had sheltered so many secrets now loomed like a gallows over the scene. Someone had turned off the party music, leaving only the sound of shocked whispers and muffled sobs. Frank, Marla stepped toward him, reaching out. You're destroying everything. All of us. Is that what you want? No, Marla. I didn't destroy anything. You and Philip did that the first time you betrayed our marriage. You did it again every time you let him steal from our daughter's future. I'm just showing everyone the truth. Daddy. Adrienne's voice was small, childlike. She hadn't called him that in years. The house in Martha's Vineyard, the one uncle, the one Philip promised for the graduation party next week. Was that a lie? Frank finished gently. Like everything else, there is no house, no trust fund, no future he promised you. Just a lot of empty words from a man who's been conning us all for 25 years. The gravity of the situation finally seemed to hit Philip. His usual smooth confidence cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. I can explain everything, he said, reaching for his phone. Let me make a few calls. I can have the funds transferred by morning. Everything's just temporarily allocated. Allocated? Richard Thompson laughed bitterly. Is that what you call stealing? My wife's medical fund, our grandchildren's education, temporarily allocated? The murmurs were growing angrier. Philip began backing toward the house, his eyes darting between faces that had transformed from admiring to hostile in the space of minutes. Frank, you need to calm these people down. You don't understand what you're doing. Oh, I understand perfectly. Frank's smile never wavered. I understand that right now, federal investigators are going through every account you've ever touched. I understand that while you were kissing my wife behind that tree, thinking you'd finally won, everything you've built was crumbling. I understand that in about 30 seconds, you're going to try to run. And I understand exactly why that would be a very bad idea. As if on cue, the sound of car doors slamming came from the front of the house. Heavy footsteps on the porch. The party guests parted like a wave as federal agents moved through the yard, their badges catching the last light of day. Philip Connell? The lead agent's voice carried authority that cut through the chaos. We have some questions about your investment practices. The sunset painted the sky in shades of blood and gold as Philip was led away in handcuffs. Marla's screams had faded to quiet sobs, the kind that spoke of a world shattering beyond repair. The party guests had mostly dispersed, leaving behind half-empty glasses and abandoned plates like artifacts of a civilization destroyed in an instant. Frank stood in his study, methodically placing folders into his briefcase. Each one represented a piece of the life he was about to leave behind. Property deeds, bank statements, business contracts. All of them signed over, transferred, or liquidated weeks ago with the help of his neighbor, retired Judge Herbert Clay. The papers are all in order, Herbert said from his position by the door. He looked older than his 70 years, the weight of the day's revelations evident in the slump of his shoulders. But Frank, are you sure about this? Disappearing won't solve anything. I'm not trying to solve anything, Herb. Frank closed the briefcase with a decisive click. I'm trying to survive it. Everything I built, every relationship I valued, was based on lies. My wife, my daughter, my cousin, they made their choices. Now I'm making mine. Through the window, he could see federal agents combing through Philip's car, their movements precise and practiced. Another team was escorting shocked party guests to waiting vehicles, taking statements about their investments with the man they trusted because Frank Hardy had trusted him. The firm, Herbert asked, though he already knew the answer, sold to Anderson and Partners last week. They're keeping the staff, honoring all contracts. Jerome will handle the transition. Frank straightened his tie, a habitual gesture that now seemed pointless. The house goes to auction next month. Cars too. Everything's been converted to liquid assets, transferred to accounts only I can access. And Marla gets nothing. Frank's voice was flat. The prenup she signed was very specific about infidelity. Judge Martinez already approved the divorce filing this morning. He owed me a favor after that courthouse renovation project. Once the federal investigation reveals the extent of her involvement in Philip's schemes, she'll be lucky if she keeps her freedom. A commotion from the front yard drew their attention. Marla's voice, shrill with panic. What do you mean, seized? Those are my personal accounts. Frank allowed himself a grim smile. And that would be the federal agents freezing their assets. Turns out Philip wasn't just stealing from our friends and family. He was running a Ponzi scheme across 3 states. The evidence trail is very clear. Thanks to Luther. Frank. Herbert stepped closer, lowering his voice. What about Adrian and Trevor? At the mention of his children, Frank's composed facade cracked slightly. Trevor's trust fund is secure. I moved it before Philip could touch it. He's away at college, thankfully missing this disaster. As for Adrian, he paused, the weight of his daughter's betrayal heavy in the air. She's 18 now, an adult. She made her choice when she helped them hide their affair. Let her learn what that choice really means. She's still your daughter. Is she? Frank turned to face his old friend. She calls him Daddy when I'm not around. Let him be her father now. From behind prison bars, the sound of more cars arriving penetrated the study's thick walls. Herbert moved. More federal agents. And, is that a news van? Right on schedule. By morning, this will be all over the local news. The respected architect, the fraudulent cousin, the faithless wife. Connecticut's scandal of the year. Frank picked up his briefcase. Which is why I won't be here to see it. Where will you go? Better you don't know. The FBI will have questions for everyone in my life. This way, you can honestly say you have no idea. Frank reached into his desk drawer and withdrew an envelope. Give this to Trevor when he comes looking. Not Adrian. She made her choice. But Trevor. He deserves to know the truth. Herbert took the envelope, its weight suggesting more than just a letter inside. The surveillance footage? And account statements. Bank records. Everything Luther found. Trevor's smarter than his sister. He'll understand. Frank checked his watch. I need to go. My flight leaves in 2 hours. Frank. Herbert struggled to find the right words. Is this really the answer? Running away. I'm not running away, Herb. I'm starting over. Everything I built here was based on lies. Every memory, every relationship, every success. All of it tainted by their deception. Frank moved to the door, then paused. You know what the worst part is? I don't think Philip even started out to destroy us. I think he just saw opportunities and took them, one small betrayal at a time, until suddenly he was in too deep to stop. And Marla, she chose him. My own wife chose a con man over 25 years of marriage. Through the study room, they could see Adrian sitting on the porch steps, still in her graduation gown. The white fabric was smudged with grass stains now, the honor cords tangled and askew. She looked lost, her perfect world crumbling around her. She's just a kid, Frank. She made a mistake. No, Frank's voice was firm. She made a choice, just like I'm making one now. He picked up his briefcase and headed for the door that led to the garage. Goodbye, Herb. Thank you for everything. What should I tell them? When they ask where you've gone, Frank paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the dying light. Tell them I learned from the best. Tell them I disappeared, just like their money. 3 months had passed since the graduation party, since his carefully orchestrated exposure of Philip's fraud and Marla's betrayal. The morning Seattle Times lay on his desk, the headline still capable of drawing a bitter smile. Connecticut financial scandal claims new victims. The article detailed the growing list of Philip's fraudulent activities, the millions stolen, the lives destroyed. Frank had read it twice, each word a confirmation that his actions had been necessary, if not entirely satisfying. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Hardy, your 3 o'clock is here." "Thank you, Sarah." He'd hired a new assistant here. No more Jerome to remind him of his old life. "Send them in." The woman who entered carried herself with the confident grace of someone used to commanding attention. Her silver-streaked dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her suit speaking of taste and success without ostentation. "Mr. Hardy? I'm Victoria McCabe. Call me Vicky." "Frank," he replied, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Your proposal intrigued me," Vicky said, pulling out a tablet. "Sustainable housing projects aren't usually this ambitious or this well-funded." Frank smiled, no warmth reaching his eyes. "Let's just say I recently came into some liquid assets that I'd like to put to better use than my previous investments." Vicky's sharp eyes studied him over her reading glasses. "I did my research before coming here. The scandal in Connecticut. That was your family?" "Former family," Frank corrected. "And yes, which is why I'm particularly interested in your firm's reputation for ethical business practices and transparent financial management." "Ah," Vicky nodded slowly. "You're not just looking for an architectural partner. You're looking for redemption." "I'm looking to build something honest," Frank replied. "Something that can't be corrupted by lies or stolen by fraud. Something that might help people who've lost everything to trust again, like your former friends and neighbors lost everything to Philip Connell." Frank's jaw tightened at the name. "You've done your homework. I'll make it a point to know who I'm dealing with." Vicky set her tablet aside. "Your reputation as an architect is impeccable. Your designs for the Bradley Center in Hartford won awards. But that's not why I agreed to this meeting." "Oh." "I agreed because I watched the video of you exposing that fraud at your daughter's graduation party. That took courage and planning. You orchestrated that revelation like you would design a building. Every detail considered, every reaction anticipated. That's the kind of thinking we need for these projects." For the first time in months, Frank felt something like pride stir in his chest. "The projects I'm proposing aren't just about sustainable housing. They're about rebuilding trust, creating communities where transparency isn't just a buzzword, but a founding principle. And the fact that such projects might help restore your professional reputation after the scandal, that's just a bonus." "My reputation?" Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ms. McCabe, my reputation was built on trust. Every client, every project, every recommendation I ever made led people to trust Philip. Their losses are part of my legacy now. I'm not looking to restore my reputation. I'm looking to earn a new one." Vicky studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she reached in her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Then let's talk about your ideas for the Morton Street project. Your proposal for mixed-income sustainable housing is ambitious, but with the right team." They spent the next 2 hours discussing blueprints and budgets, environmental impact studies, and community integration plans. Frank found himself engaging with pure architecture again, without the weight of family obligations and social connections coloring every decision. "One last thing," Vicky said as they wrapped up. "The investors I mentioned, they'll want to know about Connecticut, about the scandal. Tell them everything," Frank replied without hesitation. "Every detail. How my cousin who wasn't my cousin ran his schemes. How my wife helped hide it. How I exposed it all. Let them see exactly what happens when trust is broken." He stood and walked, "and then tell them how we're going to build something different. Something that can't be stolen or corrupted. You really believe that's possible?" "I have to." Frank turned back to face her. "Otherwise, Philip wins. And I didn't lose everything just to let that happen." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hardy? There's a call from Connecticut. Someone named Trevor." Frank's hand hovered over the intercom button for a moment. His son, the only one who hadn't been at the graduation party, who hadn't chosen sides in the destruction of their family. But it was too soon. The federal investigation was still ongoing, reporters still circling like vultures around anyone connected to the scandal. "Take a message," he told Sarah. Then, to Vicky, "Shall we continue this discussion over dinner? I know a place with an excellent view of the Sound. Actually, Vicky gathered her papers. I think we've covered enough ground for today. I'll have my team review the proposals and get back to you next week. She paused at the door. But Frank, whatever you're running from, it has a way of catching up eventually. I'm not running, Ms. McCabe. I'm rebuilding. There's a difference. After she left, Frank stood for a long time. Somewhere back east, Philip was facing federal charges. Marla was probably still trying to access their frozen accounts. And Adrian, he pushed the thought away. They had all made their choices. His phone buzzed with a text from Luther Haney. Federal investigation expanding. 3 more states involved. You were right about everything. Frank deleted the message without replying. The truth was out now, spreading like ripples in a pond, touching lives he'd never even known were connected to Philip's schemes. His revenge, if that's what this was, had taken on a life of its own. He picked up the Seattle Times again, scanning the article one last time. Near the bottom was a quote from one of Philip's victims. We trusted him because Frank Hardy trusted him. How do you recover from something like that? You build something new, Frank whispered to the empty office. Something honest, something real. In his new office, in his new city, Frank Hardy began to sketch out plans for a future built on transparency instead of deception, on strength instead of betrayal. The architect in him knew that the strongest foundations were often built on the ruins of what came before. He had lost one family, one life, one legacy. But here, in this rain-washed city 3,000 miles from his past, he could finally begin to build another. Frank's corner office in downtown Seattle, illuminating the array of awards and certificates that lined the walls. Each one represented a successful, sustainable housing project, a testament to the new legacy he'd built 3,000 miles from his old life. Victoria McCabe stood beside him, reviewing the latest plans for their affordable housing complex in Portland. The environmental impact report came back better than expected. We're looking at a 40% reduction in energy costs compared to traditional buildings. Frank nodded, but his attention had drifted to the waiting room beyond his office door. Through the glass, he could see a woman sitting alone, her head bowed. Even from this distance, even after 3 years, he'd recognize Marla anywhere, though this Marla bore little resemblance to the polished socialite who had laughed at him in their Connecticut backyard. Frank? Vicky followed his gaze. Do you know her? My ex-wife. The words felt strange on his tongue, dusty from disuse. I haven't seen her since the graduation party. Vicky gathered her papers. Wanting to call security? Frank studied Marla more closely. Her once perfect blonde hair had thinned considerably, her designer clothes replaced by something off the rack that hung loose on her frame. She looked diminished. No, I'll see her. Vicky hesitated at the door. Are you sure? After everything. I'm sure. Frank straightened his tie, a habit he'd never broken. Whatever brought her across the country, it must be important. As Vicky left, nodding curtly to Marla on her way out, Frank took a moment to center himself. The office around him represented everything he'd built since leaving Connecticut. Success founded on transparency, projects that actually help people instead of just making them look good at charity galas. Send her in, he told his assistant through the intercom. Marla's entrance was hesitant. Nothing like the confident woman who had once commanded every room she entered. Cancer had carved away at her, leaving behind sharp angles where there had once been elegant curves. Her eyes, though, were the same, but now they held something he'd never seen before. Fear. Hello, Frank. Her voice was raspy, whether from illness or emotion. He couldn't tell. You look well. What do you want, Marla? She sank into one of the visitor chairs, her movements careful, measured. I didn't know where else to go. The medical bills. She pulled out a stack of papers from her worn handbag. The insurance won't cover the experimental treatments. And after everything with Philip, Frank's voice was flat. How's my dear cousin? Still in federal prison. Marla's hands twisted in her lap. He'll be there for another 12 years at least. Everything's gone, Frank. The accounts, the properties, it was all just paper. Numbers on a screen that disappeared when they started investigating. Frank walked looking out. 3 years had softened some edges of his anger, but not all. And now you've come to me. After everything, I know I have no right. Marla's voice cracked. What I did, was unforgivable. But I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for help. Not for me, but for Trevor and Adrian. Frank turned sharply. What about them? Trevor's in his final year of medical school. He's been helping with my care, studying my case. But the stress, the extra hours he's working to help with expenses. She wiped at her eyes with a tissue that had seen better days. And Adrian. She lost everything too. Her trust fund, her plans for grad school. She's working 2 jobs trying to help with the medical bills. Our children are adults now, Frank said carefully. They made their choices. Trevor didn't choose anything. Marla's voice rose slightly. He was away at college when it all happened. And Adrian. She was just a teenager who thought she was being loyal to her mother. We were wrong, Frank. I was wrong. But they shouldn't have to pay for my mistakes. Frank returned to his desk, pressing his palms flat against its surface. The wood was reclaimed from an old warehouse they'd converted into affordable apartments, his first successful project with Vicky. Everything in this office represented his new life, built on the ruins of the old. The treatments, he said finally. What are they? Marla handed over the medical documents with trembling hands. It's a new immunotherapy protocol. Early results are promising, but because it's experimental, she trailed off as Frank began reading through the papers. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of the office air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic below. Frank read each page methodically, his architect's mind breaking down complex medical terminology into manageable pieces. Stage 4, he said finally, looking up. How long? Without the treatment? 6 months, maybe less. Marla's attempt at a smile wavered. With it, they're seeing remission rates of 60% in similar cases. Frank leaned back in his chair, studying the woman he'd once loved beyond reason. The woman who had betrayed him in every way possible. The mother of his children. She'd lost weight, too much, and dark circles haunted her eyes. Her hands, once adorned with expensive rings, were bare except for faint tan lines where jewelry had been sold to pay bills. Why didn't the children come to me directly? Trevor wanted to, but he wasn't sure you'd take his calls after everything. And Adrian, Marla's voice caught. She thinks she doesn't deserve to ask for anything. She's punishing herself more than you ever could. Frank stood and walked to a digital photo frame on a side table, one of his few personal touches in the otherwise professionally decorated office. It cycled through images of his recent projects: sustainable housing complexes, community centers, a medical research facility in Portland. Each one represented a step further away from his old life. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, he said finally. Leave the medical documents with my assistant. And Marla? He turned to face her. Get some rest. You look exhausted. She stood slowly, gathering her bag. Thank you for seeing me, Frank. Whatever you decide. Thank you for at least hearing me out. As she reached the door, Frank spoke again. Does Philip know? About the cancer? I wrote to him. Marla's smile was bitter. He sent back a form letter through his lawyer. Something about being unable to discuss financial matters due to ongoing legal restrictions. Of course he did. Frank's voice held no surprise, only tired confirmation. That's who he always was. We just couldn't, or wouldn't see it. After Marla left, Frank canceled his remaining meetings for the day. He sat at his desk for a long time, looking at the medical documents, but not really seeing them. Finally, he picked up his phone. Herbert? It's Frank. I need your help setting something up. A medical trust. He paused. Yes, for Marla. But this time, we do it differently. This time, we do it right. The conference room at Seattle Memorial Hospital offered a panoramic view of the city, but Frank Hardy's attention was focused entirely on the documents spread across the polished table before him. Dr. Sarah Chun, the lead oncologist for Marla's case, had just finished presenting the detailed treatment plan. The immunotherapy protocol shows promising results, she concluded, pointing to a graph. But the window of opportunity is narrow. We need to start treatment within the next 2 weeks for optimal outcomes. Herbert Clay, who had flown in from Connecticut to help structure the medical trust, cleared his throat. The paperwork is ready, Frank. We've set it up exactly as you specified. Direct payment to medical providers. No possibility of funds being diverted. Frank stood and walked. 3 years ago, he'd left Connecticut with nothing but carefully calculated revenge and the determination to build something new. Now here he was, preparing to step back into the lies he'd left behind. "Where are the children now?" he asked without turning. "Trevor's in his apartment at medical school, probably studying." Herbert consulted his phone. "Adrienne's working a double shift at the coffee shop. Neither of them knows you're considering this." Frank turned back to the room. "Dr. Chen, would you give us a moment?" After the oncologist left, Herbert moved to stand beside his old friend. "You don't owe them anything, Frank. What they did. This isn't about owing," Frank interrupted. "It's about choosing who I want to be now." He picked up one of the medical documents, studying the complex treatment protocol. "When I left Connecticut, I thought revenge would be enough. Expose Philip's fraud. Watch their perfect world crumble like they destroyed mine. But you know what I've learned building affordable housing these past 3 years? What's that? That sometimes the strongest structures rise from ruins." Frank set the document down decisively. "Set up the trust, Herb, but I want some conditions." Over the next hour, they worked out the details. The trust would cover all medical expenses, but with strict oversight. More importantly, it would include provisions for Trevor's medical school expenses and a separate fund for Adrienne to return to graduate school, if she chose to. "You're giving them a second chance," Herbert observed as they finished reviewing the documents. "All of them?" "No," Frank corrected. "I'm giving myself one." The signing took place later that afternoon. Marla arrived looking even more fragile than before, her eyes wide with disbelief as Herbert explained the terms of the trust. "Why?" she whispered when he finished. "After everything we did." Frank met her gaze steadily. "You chose sides," he said, echoing their daughter's words from 3 years ago. "Now I'm choosing humanity over vengeance." Marla's hands trembled as she signed the documents. "The children, they don't know about this. They'll find out soon enough." Frank's voice was firm. "But this isn't about rebuilding what we lost, Marla. That's gone. This is about building something new, something honest." After she left, Herbert stayed behind, studying his friend. "You know this will change everything. They'll try to contact you, try to rebuild relationships. Let them try." Frank gathered the signed documents into his briefcase. "But on my terms this time. No more lies, no more pretense." He paused at the door. "The truth is, Herb, I'm tired of letting Philip's betrayal define who I am. He stole 25 years of trust from me. I won't let him have the rest of my life, too." The Cancer Treatment Center, its innovative design a testament to the marriage of form and function. Every detail had been carefully considered, from the comfortable treatment rooms to the communal spaces that encouraged healing through community. Frank stood in the lobby, studying the final touches being installed. The center represented everything he'd learned over the past 3 years, about building, about healing, about second chances. But today wasn't about architecture. Today was about family. Trevor arrived first, his medical residence coat exchanged for a suit that made him look older than his years. He'd grown into his features, no longer the uncertain college student who'd missed his sister's graduation party, but a doctor who had found his calling through his mother's illness. "Dad?" He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets. "The center, it's incredible. Your input was invaluable," Frank acknowledged. The treatment room design especially. They stood in awkward silence until Trevor spoke again. "Mom's last scan was clean. 6 months cancer-free." "I know. Dr. Chun keeps me updated." Frank gestured to the waiting area. "Shall we sit? Adrienne should be here soon." As if on cue, the front doors opened, and Adrienne entered. Gone was the entitled teenager who had helped hide her mother's affair. In her place stood a young woman in business casual attire, her expression tentative but determined. "Father." She held herself stiffly, clearly uncertain of her welcome. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us." Frank studied his daughter, noting the changes 3 years had wrought. The entitled arrogance was gone, replaced by something more grounded. Working with fraud victims had taught her hard lessons about trust and consequences. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs. "Both of you." Once they were settled, an uncomfortable silence fell. Trevor broke it first. "We've been talking, Adrienne and I, about everything that happened, about the choices we made." And the ones we let others make for us, Adrian added quietly. I was so young, so sure I knew everything. Mom and Philip, they made it seem like a romance novel. Star-crossed lovers, trapped by circumstance. She laughed bitterly. I never saw the con until it was too late. None of us did, Frank replied. That was Philip's talent, making us see what he wanted us to see. But you figured it out, Trevor said. You saw through it all. That's why you weren't there that weekend I came home from college, isn't it? You were already planning your response. Frank nodded slowly. I had suspected something for months. Luther's investigation just confirmed what I already knew in my gut. But you had suspicions too, didn't you, Trevor? His son shifted uncomfortably. Things didn't add up. The way Philip always seemed to have unlimited money but needed to borrow from family. The inconsistencies in his stories. But I didn't want to believe it. And now? Frank asked. What do you believe now? That trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild, Adrian answered instead. That's what I've learned working with fraud victims. But also that sometimes the attempt to rebuild is worth more than the original structure. Frank smiled slightly at the architectural metaphor. Is that why you're both here? To rebuild. We're here because we've learned that choices have consequences, Trevor said firmly, and that it's never too late to make better ones. Mom's recovery got me thinking, Adrian added, about second chances, about redemption. The trust you set up, you didn't have to do that. After what I did, you could have let us struggle. That would have been Philip's way, Frank replied, using people's desperation against them. I chose a different path. They talked for hours, there in the lobby of the cancer center, about the past 3 years, about their mother's recovery, about the lessons they'd all learned. Trevor spoke about his medical residency, how treating cancer patients had taught him about resilience. Adrian shared stories from her work with fraud victims, how helping others heal had begun to heal something in herself. As the sun began to set, Frank stood. I have one more thing to show you. He led them to a wall near the entrance, where a simple plaque hung beside a larger display. The plaque read, The Preston Hardy Center for Healing, where second chances begin. Preston was Mom's maiden name, Trevor observed. Yes, Frank touched the plaque gently. Because despite everything, she's still your mother. Still part of your story. In this center, it's not about erasing the past. It's about building something meaningful from it. Adrian wiped tears from her eyes. Is this forgiveness? This is a beginning, Frank corrected. Forgiveness is a process, not a moment. Like healing, like rebuilding, he turned to face his children. I'm not the same man who left Connecticut 3 years ago. You're not the same people who watched your mother's affair destroy our family. We all have to decide what to build from those ruins. As they prepared to leave, Trevor hung back. Dad? Beth, your environmental lawyer friend. Mom mentioned she's been good for you. Frank smiled, his first genuine smile of the day. She has. She understands about rebuilding from ruins. Her first marriage, well, that's her story to tell. But yes, she's been very good for me. Will we meet her someday? Adrian asked hesitantly. Someday, Frank agreed. When we're all ready. When we've built enough trust to try being a family again. A different kind of family, but a family nonetheless. They parted ways in the gathering dusk, each returning to their separate lives, but with bridges carefully under construction. Months passed, and the Preston Hardy Center flourished. Marla's recovery continued, her memoir about deception and redemption finding an unexpected audience among fraud victims and their families. She donated all proceeds to support groups, a gesture that surprised Frank but didn't shock him. She was finding her own path to redemption. Then came Trevor's wedding day. Dr. Lucia Bennett had walked into Trevor's life during his residency, her dedication to oncology matching his own. They'd bonded over late-night hospital shifts and shared commitments to healing. Frank adjusted his tie, watching the guests filter in. Beth squeezed his hand, her presence a steady comfort. She understood complicated families, having navigated her own path through divorce and rebuilding. Her children, Alex and Sarah, had already claimed Trevor as their new big brother. Ready? She whispered as Marla entered with Adrian. Both looked healthy now. Marla's cancer in remission, Adrian carrying herself with new confidence gained from her work as a victim advocate. Getting there, Frank replied honestly. The ceremony was everything Trevor and Lucia had wanted. Simple, meaningful, focused on the future while honoring the past that had brought them together. When the officiant asked who supported this union, both families stood. Frank found himself standing beside Marla, and for the first time in years, the proximity didn't hurt. During the reception, the family photographer, not Claire this time, but someone new, gathered them for photos. Frank stood with Beth, surrounded by their blended family. Trevor and Lucia, radiant in their joy. Adrian, who had found purpose in helping others heal. Beth's children, who brought fresh energy to family gatherings. And yes, even Marla, standing at an appropriate distance but included nonetheless. The photographer checked his shot. Perfect. Everyone looks so natural. Frank surveyed the group, thinking about journeys and destinations. Philip's betrayal had cost him one family, but led him to create something more meaningful. A legacy of healing that touched not just buildings, but lives. The architect had rebuilt more than structures. He'd rebuilt trust, hope, and possibility. Later, as the dancing began, Frank watched Trevor lead Lucia across the floor. Beth leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in their shared contentment. "Penny for your thoughts," she murmured. "Just thinking about foundations," he replied, "and how sometimes the strongest ones are built on cleared ground." Across the room, Adrian was deep in conversation with a victim support group she'd helped establish. Marla sat with some of the cancer center's staff, discussing her memoir's impact on patients' families. Every person in the room represented a piece of their rebuilt world. Not perfect, but real. Not flawless, but honest. The wedding photographer captured one final shot. Frank surrounded by his new extended family, including Trevor, Lucia, and Beth's children. The photo showed no trace of bitterness, only the joy of a man who had chosen to build something new from the ashes of betrayal. In the end, Frank's revenge wasn't in destroying his betrayers. It was in creating a legacy that transformed lives, including those who had hurt him most. The architect had rebuilt not just his life, but a whole community, proving that the best revenge is a life well lived. His cousin's betrayal had cost him one family, but led him to create something far more meaningful, a legacy of healing, both architectural and human, that would outlast any deception. As the evening wound down, Frank stood up. The Preston Hardy Center was visible in the distance, its innovative design a testament to what could rise from ruins. Behind him, the sounds of celebration continued. Laughter, music, the murmur of conversations between people who had learned the hard way about trust, betrayal, and redemption. Beth joined him at the window. "They're getting ready to leave," she said. Trevor and Lucia. Frank turned to watch his son embrace Adrian, shake hands with the cancer center staff, who'd become like family, kiss his mother's cheek, and finally make his way to where Frank stood. "Dad," Trevor said simply, pulling him into a hug. "Thank you for everything." As he watched the newlyweds depart, Frank reflected that architecture had taught him many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was this: what matters isn't just what you build, but how you build it. And sometimes, the most beautiful structures rise from the ashes of what came before, stronger for having been broken, more valuable for having been rebuilt with purpose and truth. The legacy he'd created, the cancer center, the sustainable housing projects, the rebuilt relationships with his children, would outlast any betrayal. In choosing to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, Frank Hardy had created something Philip's deception could never touch. A future founded on truth, strengthened by forgiveness, and built to last. Epilogue. 10 years later, the Connecticut State Correctional Facility's visitor room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Philip Connell, now 63, his salt and pepper hair faded to mostly gray, sat at the metal table in his prison uniform, reviewing the paperwork before him. His hands, once manicured and adorned with expensive watches, were bare and weathered from years of prison labor. "Sign here," the parole officer indicated. "And here. This acknowledges that you understand the terms of your release." Philip's hand trembled slightly as he signed. 15 years into his 20-year sentence, He was being released early for good behavior and cooperation in other fraud investigations. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and manipulated millions now struggled to fill out basic forms. Your restitution payments will continue, the officer reminded him. 50% of any income you earn goes directly to the Victim Compensation Fund. I understand. Philip's voice was hoarse from disuse. Few visitors came anymore. Most had stopped after the first 5 years. Has there been any response to my request? The officer checked his notes. Mr. Hardy's lawyers maintain their position. The restraining order stays in place. No contact with him or any member of his family, including Mrs. Preston. Marla Preston, she'd reclaimed her maiden name after the divorce, had rebuilt her life from the ashes Philip left behind. Her memoir, The Price of Betrayal, a Cautionary Tale, had become required reading in ethics courses at several business schools. She toured the country speaking about fraud awareness and relationship deception, her own story serving as a powerful warning to others. The cancer had returned twice more over the years, but the trust Frank had established ensured she received the best possible care. She'd survived, though the treatments left their mark. These days, she lived modestly in a small apartment near Trevor's family, helping care for her grandchildren and volunteering at the local cancer support center. What about Adrian? Philip asked. Is she still? Dr. Hardy Mitchell, the officer corrected, continues her work with fraud victims and their families. Her research on the psychological impact of long-term financial deception has been widely published. She's made it clear she doesn't wish to hear from you. Adrian had transformed her guilt and complicity into a driving force for change. Her doctoral dissertation on the psychological manipulation techniques used by confidence artists had drawn heavily on her personal experience with Philip. She'd married another psychologist, Dr. James Mitchell, who specialized in family trauma. Together, they ran a practice helping families heal from betrayal and fraud. And Trevor? Dr. Hardy is chief of oncology at the Preston Hardy Center in Seattle. He has also requested no contact. Trevor's medical career had soared. His experience with his mother's cancer and his father's response had shaped his approach to treating not just the disease, but the families affected by it. The Preston Hardy Center had expanded to 3 locations across the West Coast, each combining cutting-edge medical care with Frank's innovative architectural design focused on healing environments. Philip nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of these successes built on the ruins he'd created. His cell walls were covered with newspaper clippings, not of his crimes, but of the achievements of those he'd betrayed. Frank's sustainable housing projects transforming communities. Marla's speaking tours helping others avoid similar deception. The children's professional successes. Even Luther Haney, the private investigator who'd exposed him, had written a best-selling book about detecting financial fraud in close relationships. Your brother's waiting outside, the officer said, gathering the papers. He's agreed to house you during your probation. Thomas Connell, Philip's real brother, found through DNA databases years after the truth about his adoption came out, had been the only one to visit consistently. A retired high school teacher with no illusions about his brother's character, Thomas had offered Philip a small room above his garage and a job doing maintenance at the school. One last thing, the officer added. This came for you yesterday. He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a simple card. The front showed the Preston Hardy Center's latest facility, its innovative design seeming to reach toward the sky. Inside, in Frank's precise architect's handwriting, was a single sentence. The best revenge isn't destruction, it's building something that lasts. Across town, in the upscale neighborhood Philip had once called home, his old house stood empty. The bank had foreclosed years ago, but potential buyers were scared away by its history. Local real estate agents called it the con man's castle, a cautionary tale of wealth built on deception. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Frank Hardy sat in his home office, reviewing plans for his latest project. At 68, he had scaled back his direct involvement in the firm, but remained active in specific initiatives. This one was special, a rehabilitation center for white-collar crime offenders transitioning back into society. Still working? Beth appeared in the doorway, her environmental law books scattered across her own desk visible in the background. Their marriage 5 years ago had merged not just families but missions, her expertise in sustainable development complementing his architectural vision. Just finishing up, Frank smiled at his wife. Trevor and Lucia are bringing the kids over for dinner. Adrian and James are flying in tomorrow for the center's anniversary celebration. Beth settled into the chair across from his desk. I saw the card you sent Philip. Seemed appropriate. Frank's smile held no bitterness now. Did I ever tell you about the last time I saw him? At Adrienne's graduation party? Once or twice, Beth teased gently. I thought revenge would be enough, exposing him, watching everything crumble. But look at what rose from those ruins. He gestured to the wall of family photos. Trevor and Lucia with their 3 children. Adrian and James at their wedding. Marla, healthy again, speaking at a fraud prevention conference. Beth's children, now grown, who called him Dad. Even Herbert Clay, retired but still involved in the Medical Trust Administration. You built something better than revenge, Beth agreed. We all did. Frank stood. The Preston Hardy Center's distinctive profile stood out among the buildings, its design a testament to the possibility of healing. In Connecticut, Philip stepped out of prison into the harsh sunlight of freedom, carrying a small box of possessions and a mountain of consequences. His brother waited by a modest sedan. No more luxury cars or private drivers. In New York, Marla prepared for another speaking engagement, her story of betrayal and redemption still drawing crowds. In Chicago, Adrian counseled a family shattered by financial fraud, her own experience lending weight to her words of hope. In Seattle, Trevor made his rounds at the cancer center, each patient benefiting from lessons learned through his mother's illness. And in his home office, Frank Hardy, architect and builder, survivor and thriver, added one final touch to his latest design. A simple plaque that would hang in the rehabilitation center. Every ending is a foundation for a new beginning. Years of choices, consequences, and reconstruction had transformed a story of betrayal into one of resilience. The architect had built more than buildings. He'd created a legacy of healing that would outlast any deception. The tragedy that began at a graduation party had evolved into a multi-generational testament to the power of building over destroying, of healing over hurting. Philip's betrayal had cost them their original family, but from those ashes had risen something stronger, more authentic, and ultimately more meaningful. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't in destroying the betrayers, but in creating a legacy that transformed lives, including those who had caused the initial pain. Frank Hardy had rebuilt not just his life, but an entire community, proving that the best revenge truly is a life well lived, a legacy well built, and a future founded on truth rather than deception. As the sun set over Seattle, Frank closed his office for the day, leaving behind blueprints for yet another project aimed at healing and rebuilding. The architect had learned that while betrayal could destroy what was, integrity and vision could build what could be. And in that building lay the true victory over those who would destroy through deception. The story that began with a shattered champagne glass had ended with the construction of something far more precious than what was lost, a legacy that would continue to heal and build long after all the original wounds had faded into memory. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.